If I want this book to be about one overarching thing, it's freedom, and the freedom to create autonomously, without anyone telling you what to do, or how to do, or why. Our consciousness is programmed. We see things a certain way from a young age. We're programmed to keep doing them that way. Then you have to spend adulthood learning how to overcome it, to read out the programs, try to create. I want to tell people to create. Just start by creating your day, then create your life. And this is an excerpt from the book we're going to talk about today, The Beautiful Ones by Prince and Dan Piepenbring.
Welcome to Performers, the podcast that takes you into the minds of the world's most extraordinary athletes, coaches, and performers. We're your hosts. I'm Dr. Duncan Simpson, and you just heard from Dr. Greg Young. As sports psychology experts, we'll guide you through the pages of their autobiographies, revealing the mindsets, strategies, and habits that propelled the world's best to the pinnacle of their fields. Our goal is to help you learn from history's greatest performers. For each episode, we read and condense entire autobiographies into concentrated insights representing over 20 hours of work per episode. You gain not only the collective wisdom of these elite performers, but also access to over 30 years of our professional expertise in sports psychology. Listening to this, you're saving countless hours while accessing the distilled wisdom and proven strategies of the best in their fields. Today's a little different, and we're super excited to share something new with you. For the first time on Performers, we're stepping outside the world of sports to explore the life and mindset of a performer from a completely different domain, music.
Dun, dun, dun.
Nice jingle.
Yeah, that's music.
Yeah, there we go. While our bread and butter will always be athletes and coaches, we've always believed that performance principles transcend domains, hence the name Performers and not athletes. This episode is a testament to that belief. We encourage you, just like the athletes and coaches we admire, to stay open-minded, curious, and ready to learn from one of history's greatest performers. So, Greg, I'm sure everyone listening will have heard of Prince, the artist formerly known as Prince, or indeed just Symbol, but may not know a lot about him or this book. So why don't you tell the listeners a bit about this book, as it's a little bit different, I'd say.
I would say different is an understatement here. Duncan, this book, The Beautiful Ones, is unlike anything we've covered before, and indeed anything I've ever read before. To say it is no traditional autobiography is an understatement of the highest order. To be honest, what it is a bit all over the place, and it's loaded with photos, handwritten scribbles and notes, and changes voices between Prince and his co-author. But what it definitely is a fascinating exploration of Prince both as a person and as an artist. So it was published in 2019, and it's part memoir, part scrapbook, part creative manifesto. It's truly unique. It's a collection of things that give us a window into how Prince became, well, Prince, to be perfectly honest. The book also reflects the vision of Dan Piepenbring, who's a young editor who Prince personally handpicked to collaborate on the memoir, and their partnership began just months before Prince's untimely death in 2006. And the book is largely framed by Dan's sort of poignant introduction, and the introduction is quite long, but provides a bit of an understanding about how they got together and kind of the little short but meaningful relationship that they had together. So the book is divided into 4 sections. The first is a memoir that Prince began writing himself, and it's a very deep personal account of his childhood growing up in Minneapolis and his family dynamics, early dreams of greatness that really sort of shaped him on that path to becoming Prince. So it's very lyrical, as you'd imagine. His handwriting is, if you get the chance to look at it, his handwriting is absolutely beautiful. It's unbelievable. And you get to see glimpses of raw imagination, relentless drive that I think defined him and his life as an artist. The next section is a bit of a scrapbook style. It's a section filled with photos, lyrics, personal notes from his early days as a musician. It's kind of like being handed his Instagram feed from the late 70s. It's playful, it's creative, and it's incredibly revealing about his thought processes. The third section captures Prince's evolution as an artist through a whole load of candid photos and reflections, and this leads to the final part, which is the original handwritten treatment for Purple Rain, which later became a movie, where he used his life story to craft together a larger-than-life persona, seamlessly blending personal truth with that myth-making. So what stands out about this book to me isn't just that it's a tribute, it's a call to action. It certainly is unfinished, because obviously Prince died, but The Beautiful Ones captures that boundless imagination that he has, his commitment to excellence, and his drive to really inspire other people. It's a rare and intimate look at the life and mind of one of history's greatest performers. Personally, for me, Duncan, I feel if I went back and read this book again, completely different aspects would leap off the page at me, as I'm sure it would be if you went back and read it. So, as always, dear listener, we encourage you to pick the book up yourself. Hell, maybe even go and get it out of a library. Imagine doing that. I know it's an analog in a digital world, but hell, let's keep them going. It's more than just a glimpse into his life. It's an invitation to think differently, create boldly, and embrace the mindset of greatness that transcends any one field.
Greg, that was a fantastic overview of his book. So why don't you start us off by highlighting some of Prince's major accomplishments?
Well, Prince wasn't just a musician, he was an innovator, absolutely. And to be honest, he was a bit of a one-man band. He could play an astonishing 27 instruments. And when I say play, I'm not talking like hot cross buns on a recorder here. We're talking, proficient in all of these instruments. He produced his own records, blended genres of funk, rock, pop, R&B into something that was uniquely his own. He really did have his own musical signature. Albums like Purple Rain, 1999, and Sign of the Times are absolute masterpieces that continue to influence generations and generations of artists. In terms of commercial success, he sold over 150 million records worldwide. That's only a couple of million more than you, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it makes him one of the best-selling artists of all time. His album Purple Rain alone sold 25 million copies globally and spent 24 consecutive weeks at the top of the Billboard 200 chart. He had 47 songs on the Billboard Hot 100 with 19 top 10 hits and 5 that reached number 1 in the USA, 15 worldwide number 1 hits, as well as 8 worldwide number 1 albums. This is a crazy number for you. He released a whopping 39 albums over his lifetime, and the vault at his home, which is known as Paisley Park, kind of like a Graceland type place in Minneapolis, is said to contain mountains and mountains of unreleased material. And Prince famously said, if any track is unreleased, it's because it's not done. So he's not being selfish there. He believes in the process. In terms of awards and recognition, 7 Grammys from 38 nominations, including 1 for Lifetime Achievement, an Academy Award for Best Original Song Score for Purple Rain in 1985, an American Music Award for Achievement in 1990, and numerous others across pop, rock, soul, and R&B categories. He was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004, where he was celebrated as an innovator who rewrote the rulebook. In terms of live performances, he's widely regarded as one of the greatest live performers of all time. His energy, charisma, and skill on stage were just simply unmatched. And testament to this is his halftime show at the 2007 Super Bowl, performed in the pouring, no pun intended, Purple Rain, I guess. It's considered one of the greatest ever, watched by 140 million viewers globally. In terms of cultural influence beyond his music, he was a pioneer of fashion, identity, ownership, and he really fought for artists' rights, including his own, famously changing his name to a symbol during his dispute with Warner Brothers over who owned his actual music and the masters of those music. And he set a new standard for creative control within the industry. He believed deeply in the intersection of art and business, particularly as a matter of racial justice.
Well, you've done a fantastic job of setting the background to this book, and he is simply one of a kind and a truly world-class performer. 27 instruments. I don't think I could name 27 instruments.
That's a great point. That might be a challenge. Pause your podcast right now, see if you can write down on a piece of paper 27 separate, distinct instruments, let alone be able to play them.
So let's jump in.
So let's talk a little bit about his early life and his family background. So his father, he says, had 2 families. From a previous family, he had 3 kids, 2 girls and 1 boy. I was his second, and he wanted to do better with me than with his first son. So he was very orderly, but my mother didn't like that. She liked spontaneity and excitement. He goes on to say, my mother, although very loving and nurturing, the outgoing life of the party, sometimes could be very stubborn and completely irrational. No one could reason with my mother when she was in this state. The sound of your parents fighting is chilling when you're a child. If it happens to become physical, it can be soul-crushing. One night I remember hearing them arguing, and it got physical. At some point, my mother crashed into my bedroom and grabbed me. She was crying, but managed to smile and say, tell your father to be nice to me. She held me up as a buffer so that he wouldn't fight with her anymore. Things calmed down then. For a while, my mother subsequently got a lawyer to defend herself against my father. She basically wanted to run the household, not him. She considered him weak and narrow-minded, as opposed to the practical man that he was. While she wanted adventure and travelling, he just wanted to make sure that there was food on the table. He later says, some topics can't be glossed over. After several breakdowns of communication and even occasional violence, my mother and father divorced. I had no idea what impact that would have on me. I was 7 years old, and more than anything, I just wanted peace. A quiet space where I could hear myself think and create. The separation was good for both of them at that time. They needed to explore themselves without interference from each other. For a time, everyone was happier. My father would come by every weekend and take us to church and then to dinner afterward. Just like before, except now my mother was absent. I didn't actually begin to know my father until he left my mother. Being the only male in the house with her, I understood why he left. So Duncan, quite a humorous sentence to finish with. We're getting an insight into his early childhood here. What stands out to you from that rather lengthy passage?
What stands out, Greg, is how Prince's early life was really shaped by a profound contrast between his parents. We have on one side his father, who seems really orderly and practical and focused on stability, putting food on the table. On the other hand, his mother is spontaneous, adventurous, and it sounds like pretty emotionally unpredictable. Prince really describes himself as a synthesis of these two opposing forces. And I think it's perhaps key to understanding that creativity and his identity, to be honest. And another thing that stood out for me, Greg, was that his need for peace and quiet, a space to think and reflect and create. It's in those quiet moments of reflection that ideas can take shape and creativity flows, and I'd say innovation happens. This theme of kind of quietness, I think, transcends Prince and perhaps connects to many of our other performers that we've discussed in this podcast. If we remember back to episode 26, Pirlo was having one of those quiet moments while sitting on the toilet, trying to figure out the technique for a soccer kick. So whether it's an athlete preparing for a pivotal moment or an artist crafting their next masterpiece, having some space that's free of chaos and distraction, I think has become a theme for us on our performers' journeys. And it's a reminder of how important it is to carve out intentional moments of quietness. What about you, Greg? Anything specific that resonates for you?
Well, I think describing Pirlo on the toilet as an artist crafting their next masterpiece, that really that jumps out to me. In terms of this, I think it's powerful how he acknowledges that there is an impact of their conflict on him, that it isn't all peace and harmony, but there is an emotional impact and ultimately a creative impact. The vulnerability that he shares about witnessing their fights, and this is at a very young age, and that longing for peace and quiet as a child, that really struck me. It's clear that he didn't just carry these experiences, but what we'll see is him using these for fuel for his imagination and for his self-expression as he continues to grow and develop. So speaking of his imagination, as you might think, it is a critical tool for anyone that is creative. So here's a little bit about him using maybe that quiet time to develop his imagination. He says, "My parents were beautiful. To watch them leave the crib dressed up for a night on the town was one of my favourite things to do. Even though my mother was walking funny when she came home, it was all worth it just to see them happy. Whenever they were happy with one another, all was right in the world. The only thing better than watching mother and father getting dressed up for a night on the town was watching them leave. That's where the imagined life began. A place where I could pretend, dress up, and enter a fantasy of my own direction. A different storyline every time, but always with similar outcomes. I'm always sharp and I always get the girl. In my fantasy world, I always live far away from the public at large, usually on a mountain, sometimes a cloud, and even in an underwater cave." Duncan, we've talked a lot about our performers in previous episodes using imagery, but this is a little bit different here. His imagery isn't centered on developing specific skill or technique or tactic, but rather about creating an imaginary world for himself.
That's a great observation, Greg. It's about crafting an entire imaginary world. It sounds like a sanctuary for creativity and possibility. It isn't just visualization of success, it's a form of escape and exploration. I think that it's helping to form his identity on his own terms, I would say. Going back to the last episode with Michael Jordan, episode 28, I just want to read a little bit from Jordan's transcript, and it says, "All I knew is that I never wanted to be average. Whatever I was going to do, I wanted to do it my way. I just wanted the freedom to express myself. It wasn't about trying to be different for the sake of being different. I just wanted to follow what I felt. I had dreams. They were my dreams, and I had no fear of them." And the reason I bring that quote back up is that both Prince and Michael Jordan use their imagination, not just, I think, to refine their craft, but also as a mean of shaping, I would say, their identities and creating unique paths to greatness. For Jordan, it was about visualizing the player he wanted to become. And for Prince, it was about building an entire world where that creativity that he had inside him could flourish. Ultimately, to wrap up, Greg, I think it's a reminder of the power of our imagination, not just as a tool for refining a skill, but as a space to dream and to play and ultimately, again, create your own path to greatness.
So let's hear a little bit more about how he went about that. He said, "My mother liked to wink at me. I knew what a wink meant before I knew how to spell my name. A wink meant something covert was going on. Something special that only those who were in on it could attest to. Sometimes when my father wasn't playing piano, he'd say something to my mother and she'd wink at me. She never told me what it meant, and sometimes it would be accompanied by a gentle caress of her hand to my face. But I'm quite sure now that this was the birth of my physical imagination, an entire world of secrets and intrigue, puzzles to solve, and good old-fashioned make-believe. A place where, for a change, everything goes your way. One could get used to this. Many artists fall down the rabbit holes of their own imaginations and never return. There have been many who decry this as self-destruction, but I prefer the term free will. Life is better lived. What path one takes is what sets us apart from the rest. Duncan, this is a really fascinating and pretty complex experience to get inside the mind of a great artist.
You're right. It's fascinating and a bit daunting to try and unravel the mind of a great artist like Prince. This section, Greg, just really highlights that profound role imagination played in his life. Not just that creative outlet, but as a defining element of his identity, of him as a young person developing in this artistic world. I think this idea of physical imagination is fascinating. It's not just about dreaming, but embodying those dreams, living them out internally before manifesting them externally. This concept resonates deeply with the lives of performers that we've discussed before. Think of someone like Simone Biles or Michael Phelps. Both use visualization to create a mental rehearsal space where they could perfect their routines and their races. What's especially striking is his reframing of what others may see as self-destruction. That term, falling down the rabbit hole of imagination, like, I love that. It's such a lyrical phrase. Like, he reframes that as free will. And for Prince, it wasn't about getting lost. It was about choosing a path that really aligned with his identity.
So Duncan, we've talked about imagery in a very broad sense here and about how he used it to create a world for himself, but he was also very specific with it in terms of how he used it. He said, there is a technique called visualization that was most certainly being employed back then, even though we had no name for it. Things I wanted to happen, I would write or type. Looking back at those lists now, most everything came true. Before an actual stab at a real, fully formed song, lists and stats were the first original writings. The list I was most proud of was the one containing my girlfriends. All the girls I liked at school were included. Whether they liked me or not was of no consequence. I liked them. They were on my list. So eventually, they would like me. Rather than the cute little kid in their first grade class, they would one day think of me as a superhero who they really just wanted to play house with. The problem with vision lists is that they take time. Patience is required.
This is such a fascinating insight, Greg, into how Prince's imagination wasn't just about creating that world of possibilities that we've talked about, but it was also about actively manifesting those possibilities into reality. What stands out is that use of visualization, both as a creative tool, but also a way of charting his own destiny, writing the girlfriends that he wanted. And he says all of them came true. And for me, it's not really about just dreaming. It's about intentionally shaping his future through mental rehearsal and also these written lists. And I think that's a real clear, tangible tool that our listeners can take away. That idea of manifestation, I'm not sure I love the term itself. It has a little bit of kind of pop psych feel about manifestation, but I think that idea through visualization is something that we've seen echoed in other people's performance journeys, that they've really thought and believed in, hey, this is the outcome, this is something I'm going to achieve. What's really interesting is how Prince highlights the patience with this process, acknowledging that manifesting things takes time. It's a reminder that while visualization is powerful, it's not a shortcut, as we know. It's about a broader commitment to one's goals, really sitting down and writing about what your goals are. And Greg, like, what's one tangible action listeners can take away from this?
Well, I think people can start to kind of create their own vision list. And I'm like you, it does have a certain level of pop psychology to it. If we put all of these things on a vision board, it doesn't mean that they're going to come true. But having an understanding of what your goals and aspirations are, writing those specific things down, what is it that you want to achieve, whether they're personal, professional, or in Prince's case, creative, being as detailed as possible, focusing on what that success looks like and feels like to you. That's kind of half of the job. The second half of the job, which I think are actually the most important bit, is how are you going to get there? What are the actionable steps that you need to take in order to bring those visions that you have, those goals, those aspirations, closer to reality? It's not just about having faith that these things are going to happen. It's about actively understanding how you are going to pursue these and what things that you're going to do to make these things happen.
Yeah, I don't think in any of our performers' journeys that success has been an accident. There's been some planning, there's been some goal setting on steroids. I'd probably say that's what we're talking about here. It's not just
Right.
saying, "Hey, I'm gonna take that little next baby step," but it's really thinking it through in as much color and detail and making it as vibrant as possible.
So this is going to come in handy for you in a pub quiz if it ever comes up, Duncan. Prince's real name was, wait for it, Prince. He was actually named after his father, John. Now, exactly. I know that that makes absolutely no sense, but his dad was a musician and his stage name was Prince. So he was actually
Wow.
named after his dad, but his dad's stage name. And for some strange reason, his mother gave him the nickname of Skipper, but there we go. He was very, very close to his father. Obviously, they ended up sharing very similar musical passions, even though his dad didn't necessarily appreciate Prince's swearing on his records. So, he does have his dad as a role model and as a teacher and a mentor, and he actually describes him as a hero. So let's hear a little bit about his dad. My dad was in a jazz band, and I went to watch one of his gigs when I was about 5. We were supposed to stay in the car, but I snuck out and went into the bar. He was up on stage, and it was amazing. I remembered thinking, these people think my dad is great. I wanted to be part of that. He also said, I thought I would never be able to play like my dad, and he never missed an opportunity to remind me of that. But we got along good. He was my best friend. We used to take turns playing Ray Charles's Unchain My Heart on piano.
Greg, this is such a powerful moment, and we know it's powerful because it happened when he was 5 and he's reflecting on it. Seeing his dad on stage, captivating an audience, he says his dad was great. That sparked that early recognition of what greatness looked like, and it sounds like it planted a seed for Prince's own aspirations. That hey, I want to be like my dad. I want to be admired. I want to be up on the stage. And of course, the theme of learning from a parental figure or a mentor resonates strongly with many of our performers, as we discussed. There were those formative moments that really instilled values, but also inspired dreams. And that's what we're hearing here.
Yeah, definitely inspired dreams. I think we can maybe question the parental techniques of a 5-year-old getting into a bar when they were meant to have been staying in the car. Neither of those options sounds phenomenal, but hey, we might not necessarily be here talking about Prince and Prince if that didn't necessarily happen.
Hopefully, it wasn't in the winter in Minnesota.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine that's going to be pretty cold. So he does talk about spending time with his father after his parents get divorced, and he goes to live with him age 12, and he says, it was the happiest day of my life. I could only go so far alone with no teacher. I needed to be near my hero. So obviously his dad's a great source of inspiration, and while he's living with his dad, he really, really wanted to go and see the Woodstock movie, which his dad thought was going to be about 4 hours of hippies rolling around in mud baths. But Prince had been reliably told by some of the older kids in school that it was 4 hours of a bit of that, but a whole lot of music. So his dad said, I'll take you on Sunday afternoon after church. Of course, that was the longest service I ever had to sit through. Service in the black church is long to begin with, but the thought of spending the night with Santana, Jimi Hendrix, and Sly and the Family Stone was too much to handle. Calling back to mind the whole experience reminds me to do the best I possibly can every chance I get to be on stage, because someone out there is seeing you for the first time. Artists have the ability to change lives with a single performance. My father and I had our lives changed that night. The bond we cemented that very night let me know that there would always be someone in my corner when it came to my passion. My father understood that night what music really meant to me. From that moment on, he never talked down to me. He asked my opinion about things. He bought me my first guitar because we couldn't fit a piano into my aunt's house. So Duncan, even though he's not necessarily seeing these people in person, the impact that viewing these performances has on him is transformative.
Great. I love that realization that every performance carries the potential to transform someone's life. For Prince, it underscores the responsibilities artists have to give their best every single time they perform, knowing that perhaps someone in the audience, it could be really a defining moment for them and the first time they've ever seen them perform. Again, Jordan in episode 28, he was motivated in a real similar way. He had that idea that perhaps there's someone sitting in the crowd that has never seen me play, and he got motivated by that. What's equally moving is how this experience it really deepened the bond between him and his father. That night, it sounded like it wasn't just about music. It was the kind of a revelation about a shared passion and a purpose together around music. It marked that turning point in the relationship, and it really cemented his father both as a supporter and a collaborator on his journey to high performance ultimately. That gesture, his father buying him his first guitar, I think just speaks volume about the impact of belief and encouragement that a parent can have.
Yeah, you mentioned revelation there, and I'd never really thought about this until now, but obviously we're usually talking about sports people, and sports fans often get to see the sports teams or the person that they support usually sort of multiple times in their life. But musicians, and particularly someone like Prince, who's incredibly high profile and always in demand, seeing a performer of that caliber in that domain might literally be a once in a lifetime experience. So I actually really love his attitude to performing here. But what we've also got here is another sliding doors moment as it opened Prince up to becoming a guitar player. So his dad, obviously a piano player, Prince could do that. And when I say guitar player, that is doing the man a disservice. Absolute aficionado. And there's actually a famous quote where Eric Clapton was asked, "What's it like to be the greatest guitar player in the world?" And he said, "I don't know. Ask Prince." Now, I double checked that line, and sadly it's apocryphal, but the talent that Prince has as a guitar player is unquestionable.
I don't know what apocryphal means.
Apocryphal, it's kind of like a myth.
Oh,
It may slightly be untrue. We're here to educate on performance. Apocryphal's a great word.
don't let a good lie get in the way of a good story.
That's true. Rules to live by. As I say, his talent is unquestionable, and if anyone has any doubt, has never actually seen Prince play the guitar, there is a performance of his playing at the concert for George Harrison, and he plays a guitar solo on George Harrison's song "While My Guitar Gently Weeps," and it is arguably the greatest 3 minutes of guitar playing you'll ever see. Duncan, we got to drop that in the show notes and see what people think about it.
I absolutely will.
Okay. So while we're on the subject of teachers, obviously his dad was clearly a driving force for him to learning instruments and the maybe more technical aspects of music. Prince was provided pretty much unfettered access to the latest and greatest in music when he met and started childcare. He was babysitting for a local DJ named Jerry. Here's another great nickname for you, Motormouth Mac. It's not quite Clyde the Glide, but Jerry Motormouth Mac is brilliant. He says, Jerry was a godsend too. Jerry loved music more than anything. Whenever the latest discs would come out, Jerry would have them first. He belonged to a DJ and record store owner pool. Having a fast track to the baddest, just released joints made you top dog in the hood. What's more, Jerry had a drum set, a piano, a mic, and an amplifier that he used for his DJ shows. I'd only ever seen an amplifier on TV before, behind the Beatles. I had no idea this device would become more important to my life than a stove. Countless hours I would spend in Jerry's basement looking at all the 8x10 glossies of the greatest R&B stars. B.B. King, Bobby Blues Bland, Al Green, and Joe Tex. Jerry even had pictures of my favourite singer, James Brown, on his wall. Jerry introduced me to Dee, the local record store owner. Dee had a shop at the end of Plymouth Avenue as we knew it. We never rode past Dee's record shop without stopping in. A trip to Dee's was a happy day. Any song that caught my fancy was first purchased, then transcribed. Lyrics only, as I never learned to read music. Recopying a lyric helps you break down a line and see what it's made of. If you feel like loving me, you've... Then, when reading the copied lyric, I'd learn the chords that went with each lyric, as the record played behind me. I learned to play and sing along with every record of choice. It didn't matter whether it was a male or female, it was the overall arrangement I was most interested in. Duncan, I don't think we can underestimate this chance relationship here and the impact that it had.
No, we can't. I don't think Jerry was a traditional mentor. He was more like a gatekeeper to a treasure trove of musical inspiration and tools. It sounds like he learned to play some of the 27 instruments in that basement. He really provided Prince with access, again, to the latest music and an environment that not only fueled his imagination, but also helped him with a technical understanding and appreciation for what I would say is the arrangement of music. I'm not a music aficionado like yourself. So with that said, I think Prince's exposure to Jerry's musical equipment, the collection, the network of influences within that DJing world, it's really a head start, I'd say, on most aspiring musicians. I think it's something that only a few could have really dreamed of. And it's a reminder for me, Greg, that access and the environment can sometimes really make all the difference in nurturing a raw talent. It's not just about innate ability, it's about having that opportunity to immerse yourself in a world that, for Prince, really expanded his horizons. For Prince, Jerry's basement wasn't just a room full of music, it was a space where he could absorb and experiment and really refine his craft. A huge sliding doors moment for me again.
I would say it's a massive competitive advantage. I think there's the story, and I don't think this one's apocryphal, of Bill Gates going and getting access to a supercomputer at Stanford University. But an example from one of our previous performers is that physical environment that Lindsey Vonn was able to access in Buck Hill, Minnesota, living really, really close to a ski resort. And she had access to not only that physical environment, but also a legendary coach. And then later, her dad decided to move the entire family to Vail in Colorado. That's basically just opened the door to, I mean, talk about elite skiing environments, but having that opportunity to have close and, as you say, pretty much unfettered access to absorb, experiment, and refine their craft. I think that's a really, really important aspect of development here. What's more important is not necessarily just simply access to this stuff. It's what you do with that access that's the key component here. Bill Gates sitting in front of a supercomputer achieves nothing, but being able to experiment and kind of use it in the same way that Prince is experimenting with musical production and developing his understanding and technical proficiency with instruments. I think that's really important here. And making sense of that experience is critical, and he did that the best way that he could by essentially singing along. He said singing along with all records, James Brown, Ray Charles, Smokey Robinson, and Aretha Franklin, helps to develop range and a sense of soul that can cover all bases. There are many great singers, but not that many funky singers. How a word is shaped in the mouth and the velocity or subtlety that a word is sung with is what characterizes a funky singer or not. Truly funky singers act like they're singing in everyday conversation. Look at an interview with some of the greats. You know the names. If you feel like you're dancing while they're just talking, that's funk. Duncan, funk is a very, very important word for Prince and a very important concept. And he actually describes it as the space between the notes. That's the good part. However long that space is, that's how funky it is, or how funky it ain't. In fact, unpacking this idea was actually a driving force behind him wanting to write the book in the first place. And he talks a little bit about that with the editor Dan as they kind of getting to grips with what they wanted the vision of the book to be. And he also he tells a brief story of dancing at a party with a girl called Marcy. He says, as I recall, I just asked Marcy to dance because she was the closest in the vicinity, and I loved the song that had just come on. It was Skin Tight by the Ohio Players, and the bass and drums on this record would make Stephen Hawking dance. No disrespect, it's just that funky. Now, this has no practical use for moving the narrative of this podcast forward. I just thought it was a pretty funny way to describe what funk is, and maybe why he's in a consistent pursuit of it. It's that feeling. You can't stop yourself moving, can't stop yourself tapping your foot or nodding your head or dancing. But it seems like it's actually a driving and underlying philosophy for him, this relentless pursuit of funk, which is, I know, going to be the title of your autobiography.
Yeah, yes, I think that's the name of my autobiography.
We need to get it trademarked right now. I don't know what form you need to fill in online, but get it done before one of the listeners does it.
Dunk the funk. Here we go. All right.
It's all coming together. I love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah. All right, back to the pod. There's one line that just really stood out for me, Greg. I love that phrase. There was a subtle phrase, and it was the space between the notes. Just such a powerful concept. That idea that magic often lies not in the obvious or the loud, but in the subtlety, in the timing, in that space where things can perhaps breathe and manifest themselves. It's about the rhythm of life, the pauses, and how those pauses create impact. It really made me think of Pirlo. And his great talent as a soccer player was that vision, the creativity, and the timing, his movement, his timing, the execution was just so subtle. He was one of the players other people love to watch. The great players look to him because he could just play between the notes, play between the gaps, play between the spaces. I think it also symbolizes that patience and precision in sports. It's that split second before taking a shot. It's the brief moment of perhaps stillness before a gymnast launches into routine, or a deliberate pause a coach takes to let a message sink into his players. It's a reminder that greatness isn't just about what you do, it's about when and how you do it. That space is where intention lives, and intention is what makes the difference. I just love that, the space between the notes.
You've made that sound incredibly poetic, and having known Perlo as a player, I totally get what you're getting at there. It's not necessarily always what you do, it's sometimes what you don't do. I heard the phrase once, staying put is not standing still. And for Perlo, it might be something like not making that run that everyone else was going to make and letting play develop around him and receiving the ball and play it on. But you've done a really, really nice job unpacking that. I didn't think you were that lyrical, to be honest.
I've had a drink.
Is it just Prince rubbing off on you here, just feeling creative?
The artist formerly known as Dunk the Funk.
Yeah, it's fun. Oh God, I can't wait for this album. Can't wait to see the track listing. So anyone who is familiar with Prince's music knows that it somewhat transcends genres. Funk is definitely front and center, and it is eclectic and it's varied in nature. So how do you get there as an artist? I think it's exposure to the eclectic, which he's definitely getting in spades here. And exposure to different types and styles of music is also important to Prince's evolution as an artist and as a creator.
That exposure to different styles and perspectives, that's just a key ingredient we've heard across our performers' journeys, Greg. It's about developing mastery, whether that's in music, sports, or any creative field. For Prince, it wasn't just about adding variety. I think it was about learning to appreciate and incorporate nuances that he hadn't valued before. We've seen this lesson particularly stick out with some of the coaches we've covered. Pat Summitt, Bill Walsh, Alex Ferguson, Phil Jackson, who were all masters at learning from their peers and sometimes their rivals to develop their own styles and systems of play. They weren't closed-minded. They wanted to continually develop as coaches. So again, it's very similar to what Prince is doing here. For athletes like artists, stepping outside of your comfort zone can be really transformative. It's about seeing the game or life itself from just a different angle.
Very well put. So this passage I'm going to read here, it actually appears as a footnote. And I thought it was really interesting to include before we start to explore a little bit about how all of these experiences influence Prince's writing. So he says, Debbie left me for the high school quarterback. Big, good-looking guy who even then could throw the ball down the field. I couldn't be the quarterback at school, so I quarterbacked my band. And I should get into that. I'll write on that. I was 13 years old and I could see everything. Literally, everything is self-creation. So you clearly can't have a catalogue of 39 albums and God knows how much more in his vault without the skill of actual songwriting. And I think Prince was very keen to express himself, obviously, and show his own voice within his work. And again, if you've listened to his music, that voice screams through the music. And particularly in the notion of writing a song that is authentic to you and evokes a certain set of emotions. He says, this is my jam. Everyone can point to at least one song that is their jam and nobody else's. The first time I knew I'd written one of those jams was Do Me Baby, a song whose intro made me feel the same way I felt the first time I heard Sweet Thing by Rufus featuring Chaka Khan. Everything about the lyric and the vocal performance is flawless. Perfect note selection on the melody, but more than that, a totally believable singer, and we buy every single word. Now the arrangement, the guitar, the bass, and the drums make this jam. It's one of the funkiest slow songs that came out at that time. After this, there were many funky ballads by the Ohio Players, Isley Brothers, and Marvin Gaye. If you're funky, even on a ballad, you'll hear it. It's just what you are. He also talks about Carrie, who was his first real girlfriend. He says Carrie was the first girl to expose a brother to just straight up animal lust, where rational thought is overcome by the strength of physical attraction. This feeling will draw words from the pen that one doesn't even know exist. This feeling will make one combine words that don't go together but just sound so good, you not only read them, you can smell them. Duncan is really preaching authenticity and a sense of emotion here.
You're right. That notion of writing a song that is authentic and evokes a specific emotional response is central to what Prince describes here. It wasn't about crafting a technically excellent piece of music, it doesn't sound like. It was about capturing a feeling that was so authentic that the listeners couldn't help but believe it. Prince's ability to translate raw emotions into a song that resonated universally speaks to his genius as an artist. I mean, that is confirmed by the worldwide success he had throughout his career. He just resonated with a lot of people because he was able to connect with them on a emotional level. And it's a reminder that authenticity in creativity isn't about a technical skill. It's about channeling your genuine experiences and emotions into your work, creating something that is uniquely yours. In the world of performers, this theme of emotional authenticity isn't limited to music. We've heard countless examples of how emotions can elevate performances across many of our athletes and coaches.
You're quite right. I think writing a technically proficient song is probably the easier part. Really communicating those emotions and a feel and a sense of authenticity. I think that's really where the craft comes in. So you talked about genuine experiences there, and genuine, obviously personal experiences are very, very important in Prince's writing. So while his experiences with Carrie firsthand are one way that this manifested in his creative process, some experiences that he had showed up in other ways. So going back to his childhood and the separation of his parents, here's an example. My mother used to call my father. There were late night calls and pleas. She wanted him to come back. She'd wake my sister and me up and have us ask him to come back. And when you're asleep as a kid, you're out. It might take a while to get there, but when you do, it's REM. So when she woke me up, I felt like I was dreaming. Music would be playing. The way it worked, she'd put on breakup music, have a drink, and then make the phone call. I think that's why I can write such good breakup songs like Nothing Compares to You, that, as a side note, Sinead O'Connor made famous. I ain't heard no breakup song like I can write. I have that knowledge. By the same token, love songs. No one writes love songs like I do. I play the ones that have love in them, whether they're mine or someone else's. With my parents, it was like two alphas got together and outdid each other. My mother thought there was no one cooler than Prince, my father. He had the best clothes, played the best music. She could never replicate it with someone else. Always carried a torch. I always say there's some part of your heart you should never give away. So Duncan, the personal experience here of hearing his mother, calling his dad, and that's the inspiration for Nothing Compares to You, which is one of the absolute legendary love songs, right? Like you put that on in a room, if there's someone in that room that doesn't know that song, kick that person out the room.
You're harsh. You're harsh.
It's a tough school, but it's for the best.
You're right, Greg. Prince's ability to channel his personal experiences into his music is really a testament to how raw, authentic emotions can fuel creativity and connection. His reflections on his parents' relationship were marked by love and heartache and this unspoken longing. It didn't just shape him as a person, they became the fabric of some of his most iconic songs. And I'm really disappointed you didn't sing it, to be honest.
Maybe we'll release another bonus episode and we can do it. We can do a greatest hits or something like that. Give the people what they really want.
But it did make me think about these personal experiences and artistic output. It isn't just about Prince. I was thinking Andre Agassi, for example, often drew on that really emotionally complex relationship with his father to fuel his performances. Agassi's reflections were both about feeling pressured, but also at times inspired by his father, and they helped him navigate his career. And it was that mix of kind of rebellion and passion, but ultimately a really deep love for his father. Similarly, Simone Biles, we saw in her journey that it was really deeply informed by that personal story, from her adoption by her grandparents to the challenges she faced managing some mental health issues. Simone Biles, her life experiences really helped to define her resilience and ultimately made her become the greatest gymnast the world has ever seen. Those performances go beyond athletic prowess. They are a story of overcoming and self-empowerment. So these examples really highlight that shared theme, that the personal experiences, no matter how challenging, can be transformed into a fuel for extraordinary performances. For listeners, it's a reminder to embrace your own stories as a source of strength and creativity, much like these performers have done.
So much like we said about being surrounded by that environment, it's not necessarily the experience itself, but it's how you channel and use that experience going forward that matters. So we've talked a lot about authenticity here, and as we're reading through our notes, the note that I put down here is not sure exactly what the best place for this section is, but it seems connected to writing and his creative process. So being authentic, here we go. He says, by the time I was a sophomore, school had gotten to be a real drag, and I was getting further and further into making music. The more I found myself entertaining at local gigs during the night, the more I hated the thought of going to school in the morning. But later on, there I was, 17, a graduate, and still frustrated. I felt I had to keep going after the music, but didn't know how long I'd be able to do it and eat too. I did know that I wanted something more than 9 to 5. Once I got out of high school, it was interesting for a while because I didn't have any money. I didn't have any school. I didn't have any dependents. I didn't have any kids or girlfriends or anything. I'd cut myself off totally from everything. And that's when I really started writing. I was writing like 3 or 4 songs a day, and they were all really long, which is interesting for me as a writer because it's hard just to take a thought and to continue it for a long period of time without losing it. And it's harder for me now to write than it was back then because there's so many people around me now. I wrote a lot of sexual songs back then, but they were mainly things that I wanted to go on, not things that were going on, which is different from what I write about now. So Duncan, Prince talks about the sacrifices that he made to focus entirely on music and kind of this push and pull that he's got going on with school and the music scene itself, but also the idea of cutting off distractions and really pouring himself and committing himself to songwriting. How do we see this level of dedication reflected in the lives of some of the athletes that we've talked about? And what lessons can our listeners draw from this really intense commitment?
Well, as they say, the biggest enemy to plan A is having a plan B. And his choice to cut himself off from conventional paths like school and stable social ties, I think, really underscores this intensity and his commitment to music. Writing 3 or 4 songs a day, that creative output is incredible. But it's also discipline that he develops over time. This idea connects to athletes who make similar sacrifices to really dedicate themselves fully to their craft. Alex Honnold stands out for me. He lived in a van for many years and dropped out of, I think it was Cal Berkeley, just to go climbing, ultimately sacrificing what would be a very traditional great education and sacrificing comfort and stability and focusing on his goal of mastering free solo climbing, which for anyone looking from the outside in would just seem crazy. And that minimalist lifestyle really allowed him to pour every ounce of energy into honing his skills and ultimately allowed him to do feats like climbing El Capitan without ropes, which again, if you haven't listened to that episode, please go back and listen to it. I think it's episode 11. Another example is Chrissy Wellington, who left behind a really stable career to fully commit to triathlon at the age of 30. Her decision required that all-in mentality, dedicating her life to training, racing, and in the pursuit of excellence. By giving up security, I think it's that forcing function that created the conditions for greatness. Those two performers that I've just highlighted, it really exemplifies how sacrificing comfort and conventional paths or even relationships can be necessary to fully commit to a vision and achieve extraordinary success.
You mentioned conventional there. We've talked a lot about authenticity and how that shows up a lot for Prince, but it's also important to recognize that that's not always the easiest thing to do. And hand in hand with that is, for him, the importance of being different and perhaps unconventional and standing out from other people, which doesn't come without some risk taken. He says the most important thing is to be true to yourself, but I also like danger. That's what's missing for pop music today. There's no excitement and mystery. People sneaking out and go to these forbidden concerts by Elvis Presley or Jimi Hendrix. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else, but I don't feel like there's a lot of people out there telling the truth in their music. He also says, I think Purple Rain is the most avant-garde purple thing I've ever done. Just look at When Doves Cry and Let's Go Crazy. Most black artists won't try a groove like that. If more would, we'd have more colourful radio stations. In the 60s, when everybody tried to be different, you had War and Santana and Hendrix and Sly and James Brown, and they were all uniquely different. Now, everybody jumps on what they think is the hottest sounds. Sometimes I just wish that when I turn on the radio, I could get that many different colours. It's fun to hear a song like Raspberry Beret on R&B. I'm not saying that I'm great or anything like that. I'm just saying that I'm an alternative. I'm something else, and I long to hear something else from everybody.
Greg, I love the idea that we're here to put a dent in the universe. And I think that's what Prince is really communicating. He's not going to go and do what everyone else does. He's going to put his dent in the universe. And he truly did do that.
You're right. That fingerprint that he left, and we know obviously fingerprints are unique, it is unmistakably him. And when you turn the radio on and you hear a Prince song, you might not necessarily have heard the song before, but you have an inkling that it is him and it is, his creativity and his work coming through the radio. And we talked about the idea that he had 39 albums and just a huge amount of work. And obviously that writing procedure of writing 3 or 4 songs a day obviously helps to do that. But there's an importance of evolution as an artist. And the fact that his name changed a couple of times talks to that evolution as an artist, but not necessarily forcing or trying to force change to happen, but noticing when change happens or is necessary, I think is really important. And Prince says, when I first got started in music, I was attracted by the same things that attract most people to the business. I wanted to impress my friends and I wanted to make money. For a while, I just did it as a hobby. Then it turned into a job and a way to eat. Now, I look on it as an art. I realised that after Dirty Mind, the album, that I can get away with anything that I want to get away with. All I have to do is be true to myself. I can make the records I want to make and still be okay. I feel free. He also says, I think I change constantly because I can hear the music changing. The other day I put on my first 3 albums and listened to the difference. And I know why I don't sound like that anymore. Because things that made sense to me and things that I liked then, I don't like anymore. The way I played music, just the way I was in love a lot back then when I used to make those records. And love meant more to me then. But now I realise that people don't always tell you the truth, you know? I was really gullible back then. I believed everyone around me. If someone said something good to me, I believed it. And I felt good when I was singing back then. The things I do now, I feel anger sometimes when I sing, and I can hear the difference. I'm screaming more now than I used to, and things like that. I think it's just me. It also has to do with the instrumentation. It has nothing to do with trying to change styles or anything.
Greg, I think what we're hearing here is just his evolution as an artist, as a performer. Like we've heard from some of our other performers, that as they evolve throughout their career, they change. Identity evolves, the way that they play the game, the way that they compete, the way they think about their career. It's just an evolution. And ultimately, it's still authentic, but it's different.
So I think for a lot of creative people, they like to have control and autonomy, and he mentioned that in the introduction there, autonomy over their creative process and ultimately their product, if that's a word that I really want to use here for that creative process, that product that they put out there. And Prince was acutely aware of the importance of doing what he wanted to do as an artist and having that creative vision without necessarily appeasing other people. And sometimes that had an impact on the people that he was working with. He says, I was always trying to get the band to do something different, and I was always teamed up on for that. Like in an argument or something like that, or a fight or whatever, it was always me against them. That's when I wrote Soft and Wet, which was the first single I put out. I really liked the tune, but everyone thought it was filthy, and you don't have no business doing stuff without us anyway. I just did what I wanted to, and that was it. So when you're in constantly butting heads and maybe having to appease other people and not wanting to do that, one way to solve this, as we've talked about, with his ability to play 27 instruments, is to be a multi-instrumentalist and not necessarily need a band. He says, I never considered myself a singer. I saw myself as an instrumentalist who started singing out of necessity. I don't think that I ever got through, but I tried explaining that to me, my voice is just like one of the instruments I play. It's just one thing I do. He also says, I think the main reason artists fall when they try to play all of the instruments is because either they can't play all the instruments really well, there's usually a flaw somewhere, or they don't play with the same intensity each track. It's a hard project to do, but you have to pretend each time that this is going to be your only track and that you're the only guy who's going to play that instrument. So every time you go into the recording booth, you have to play it like it's your only shot. If you do that, what you end up with is a whole band that is playing with the same intensity. And when we talk about playing with the same intensity, Duncan, obviously we have to talk about performing. So it's all well and good writing songs, it's all well and good creating them and producing them and being the master of your own domain musically, but you have to perform. And we're going to wrap up with just a little bit about that experience of performing for him. When I'm on stage, I'm out of body. That's what the rehearsals, the practicing, the playing is for. You work to a place where you're all out of body, and that's when something happens. You reach a plane of creativity and inspiration, a plane where every song that has ever existed and every song that will ever exist in the future is right there in front of you. And you just go for it for as long as it takes. And that's where we'll leave it. But as always, success leaves clues. So Duncan, what are your top 10 life lessons from The Beautiful Ones by Prince?
My top 10 life lessons from The Beautiful Ones by Prince. Number 1, freedom fuels creativity. True artistry comes from the ability to create autonomously. He said, if I want this book to be about one overarching thing, it's freedom. The freedom to create autonomously. Number 2, imagination is power. A vivid imagination is the foundation of creative expression. Hidden places, secret abilities, a part of oneself that is never shown is the main ingredient of a good song. Number 3, turn conflict into harmony. He says, in their discord, I heard a strange harmony that inspired me to create. Number 4, pursue mastery relentlessly. Excellence requires intensity and focus in every effort. You have to play like it's your only shot. That's how you get a band playing with the same intensity. Number 5, own your art. Creative control is not just business, it's about empowerment and legacy. He says all artists should own their masters, especially black artists. It's a way to fight racism. Number 6, manifest through visualization. Visualization can turn dreams into reality. And he said, things I wanted to happen, I would write or type. Looking back now, most everything came true. Number 7, performance is transcendence. Preparation creates the foundation for extraordinary moments. He says, when I'm on stage, I'm out of body. You reach a plane of creativity and inspiration. Number 8, embrace the risk of being different. Standing out requires courage and authenticity. The most important thing to be is true to yourself, but I also like danger. Number 9, evolve constantly. Growth comes from embracing change and moving forward. Things that made sense to me then, I don't like anymore. I change constantly because I can hear the music changing. And finally, number 10, create with purpose. Art is about more than expression. It's about impact. Try to create. I want to tell people to create. Just start by creating your day, then create your life. So Greg, I know we did something a little different today and picked a non-sport performer, but I think it's important to reflect that that top 10 could have been for any of our athletes or coaches. And as a reminder, our goal is to learn from history's greatest performers, and Prince is truly one of those.
That's an excellent point, Duncan. And as always, that is a tip-top top 10. But of course, all stories are full of cautionary tales as well. So what are our top 10 behaviors to avoid from The Beautiful Ones by Prince?
Number 1, letting others control your vision, sacrificing creative freedom to external pressures. He says, you can do anything you want. My goal is to excite and to provoke on every level. Number 2, being stuck in old programs, allowing early conditioning to limit your thinking. He says, our consciousness is programmed. Then you have to spend adulthood learning how to overcome it. Number 3, dismissing the value of imagination, underestimating imagination's role in innovation and growth. An entire world of secrets and intrigue, puzzles to solve, and good old-fashioned make-believe. Number 4, ignoring the role of preparation, assuming brilliance happens without effort. The rehearsals, the practicing, the playing, that's what it's for. Number 5, compromising artistic integrity, creating art to appease others rather than staying true to yourself. I just did what I wanted to, and that was it. Number 6, fearing to stand out, playing it safe instead of taking bold risks. He says, I'm an alternative. I long to hear something else from everybody. Number 7, resisting change, holding on to outdated ideas or methods. He said, I realized after Dirty Mind that I can get away with anything I want. All I have to do is be true to myself. Number 8, settling for mediocrity, failing to demand the best from yourself or your work. You have to pretend each time that this is going to be your only track. Number 9, focusing solely on external validation, letting fame or approval dictate your path. And he says, at first, I wanted to impress my friends and make money. Now I look on it as art. And finally, number 10, neglecting ownership, relinquishing control of your creations to others. And the editor said, he repossessed his master recordings from Warner Brothers, a victory that marked the most liberated phase of his life. Thank you so much for joining myself and Greg on this risky episode. As always, please support the show by rating us 5-star on your podcast platform and writing a review. That will help us grow the show, and for that, we are truly grateful. See you next time on Performers.
You can't discover new lands if you don't lose sight of the shore, son.